Welcome to The Explainer. I am absolutely thrilled you're here today because we are looking at a paradigm shift that is quite literally out of this world. For decades, the cosmos was basically the ultimate theater for a 20th century geopolitical proxy war. But today, that has fundamentally transformed into a massive multi-billion-dollar commercial ecosystem. Guys, we are officially in Space Race 2.0.
All right, let's just dive right in. Here's our roadmap for today. We're going to hit 1. Space Race 2.0. 2. The trillion-dollar cosmos. 3. Blurring public and private. 4. The new geopolitical rivalry. 5. Risks in the final frontier. And we'll wrap it up with 6. 4 scenarios for our future. Let's get started.
Okay, Part 1, Space Race 2.0.
The contrast between the past and present here is just stark. Think back to the 1960s Cold War rivalry. That era was all about national pride, right? It was about demonstrating technological superiority, and it was entirely fueled by massive government funding to achieve things like Sputnik and the Apollo moon landings. But compare that to the 2020s. We're talking about commercial conquest now. Today, private enterprise and profit are the ones at the wheel. You've got these visionary billionaires leading companies like SpaceX and Blue Origin, and they're aggressively driving the agenda towards space tourism, global satellite networks, and even resource extraction. And what is absolutely wild here is the speed of it all. Just looking at the timeline of recent milestones from our sources, the acceleration is crazy. I mean, in 2017, we see SpaceX reflying a previously flown Falcon 9 booster for the very first time. Fast forward just a tiny bit, and we've got China landing a rover on the moon's far side in 2018, and India's Chandrayaan-3 pulling off a successful soft landing in 2023. We are seeing these incredible historic achievements from both private companies and national agencies happening side by side, and at a pace that honestly would have been completely unthinkable during the Cold War.
Moving right along to Section 2, the trillion-dollar cosmos. $613 billion. Let that sink in for a second. That staggering figure is the estimated size of the global space economy in 2024. And the really big takeaway here is that it's not stopping there. Financial analysts project this number is going to cross the $1 trillion mark by the early 2030s. Space is no longer just a scientific endeavor for researchers. It is a booming, highly lucrative financial market.
Now, you might be wondering, where is all that cash actually coming from? Well, while sci-fi concepts like Mars colonies and space tourism definitely grab all the headlines, the reality is way more data-driven. A whopping 74% of this booming market is actually driven by commercial satellite services. We're talking about the invisible infrastructure you use every single day. Satellite broadband networks like Starlink, Earth observation, global navigation. Only about 26% of the market is made up of government and other space economy sectors. So the commercialization of space, it's really built on data. So who are the heavy hitters leading this charge? Well, let's break down the major commercial players. You have SpaceX at the very top, valued at roughly $125 billion, pulling off an astounding 98 Falcon 9 launches in 2023 alone. Then you've got Rocket Lab, carving out a really solid $6 to $7 billion market cap by specializing in small satellite launches. And then Virgin Galactic, focusing more on the suborbital tourism side. The common thread connecting them, these private companies have engineered entirely novel business models. By creating reusable rockets like the Falcon 9, they have dramatically cut the cost of getting to orbit. And that, frankly, opens the door for every single other thing we're discussing today.
Which brings us to Section 3, blurring public and private. A really fascinating example of how these worlds are colliding is the establishment of the Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE, headed by Elon Musk. Let's look at this objectively, based on our sources. On one hand, you have heavily aligned goals. Musk's dual role as SpaceX CEO and government advisor is argued to bring incredible efficiency and cost-cutting to federal operations like NASA, potentially massively accelerating human missions to the Moon and Mars. But on the flip side, there are very clearly stated concerns from observers. Critics point to potential conflicts of interest, where a business magnate is influencing federal spending that could directly benefit his own company. There are also concerns that aggressive cost-cutting might sideline crucial deep space or climate science, and maybe even lead to relaxed safety regulations for commercial projects.
And that brings us to this really crucial quote from the research. There's a tangible risk that NASA might become more of a glorified contracting agency. As the boundaries between national interests and corporate gains get blurrier and blurrier, the concern is that NASA's traditional leadership in pure exploratory scientific research could be sidelined, subbed out in favor of the profit-driven agendas pushed by their private partners. It's an incredibly delicate balancing act, trying to harness that rapid commercial innovation while still preserving vital public interest science. All right, Section 4, the new geopolitical rivalry. Let's zoom out and look at the global chessboard to see how this rivalry is building across international borders. You have the US's NASA with a massive $25.4 billion budget leading the Artemis lunar program. But right behind them is China's CNSA. They're working with roughly a $12 billion budget, boasting their very own Tiangong space station and a strategic initiative known as the Space Silk Road. Meanwhile, Russia's Roscosmos, operating on a $3 to $4 billion budget, is actively shifting its alliances towards China. The reason this matters so much is that achievements in space are no longer just about exploration. They are highly visible, strategic markers of global power and soft power influence. Now, this rivalry definitely has a darker edge to it: the militarization of space. Orbit is becoming increasingly contested. We are seeing dedicated space forces being established globally by the US, China, and India. There's active, ongoing testing of anti-satellite or ASAT weapons. In the US alone, there's a $25 billion defense space plan, often referred to as the Golden Dome, specifically for missile defense. And because so much spacecraft technology is what we call dual use, meaning it works for both civilian and military purposes, we're risking a very serious security spiral right above our heads. Which leads us directly into Section 5, risks in the final frontier. So what are the actual rules up there? Well, the bedrock of international space law is the 1967 Outer Space Treaty. It's a great document for its time. It brilliantly bans national sovereignty claims and weapons of mass destruction in space. However, it was written for an era of entirely state-sponsored missions. It is completely, crucially silent on modern private resource extraction or corporate property rights on the moon and asteroids. Basically, our legal framework is lagging decades behind our technology.
Because of that gap, we now have these competing frameworks popping up. On one hand, you have the Artemis Accords, spearheaded by the US since 2020. It's got 64 signatories, explicitly allows for resource extraction, and emphasizes these concepts called safety zones. On the other hand, you have the older 1979 Moon Treaty, which seeks to strictly regulate space exploitation as a global commons. But here's the catch with that one. The Moon Treaty only has 17 minor parties and absolutely zero major space powers signed on. Meanwhile, major players like China and Russia are completely excluded from the Artemis Accords and are instead planning their own joint international lunar research station. So we're looking at a deeply divided legal cosmos. But hey, beyond all the legal headaches, the literal, physical environment up there is becoming incredibly dangerous. There are currently over 40,000 tracked objects in orbit, but even more terrifying, an estimated 1.2 million pieces of debris larger than 1 centimeter. This creates a very severe risk of collision cascades, something known as the Kessler syndrome. Basically, one collision creates a cloud of shrapnel that causes more collisions, and suddenly we could be locked out of orbit entirely. Add in global supply chain issues and serious aerospace workforce shortages down here on Earth, and the very foundation of this trillion-dollar economy is physically threatened.
Finally, Section 6, 4 scenarios for our future. So, where is this all heading in the next 10 to 30 years? The research points to 4 main probability scenarios. First, there's a 30% chance of collaborative expansion, where nations actually share infrastructure under peaceful rules, like the Artemis Accords. Second, a 25% chance of a competitive bipolar race, essentially a space Cold War pitting the US against a China-Russia bloc. Third, a 20% chance of a commercial breakthrough, where private companies cut costs so dramatically that a low Earth orbit economy just flourishes entirely independent of governments. And lastly, a 25% chance of fragmentation and stagnation, where budget cuts, orbital accidents, and earthly tensions cause progress to just stall out entirely. The reality, our actual future will likely be a really complex blend of these, dictated by unpredictable tech breakthroughs and global diplomacy. Which brings us to our final thought for today. This new space race, it isn't just about reaching other worlds, it's really about defining our relationship with the cosmos. So you have to ask yourself, will space become a shared frontier that genuinely benefits all of humanity, or is it just going to mirror Earth's inequalities and conflicts? The decisions being made right now, by nations and by these billionaire visionaries, are going to shape humanity's place in the universe for generations to come. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and keep your eyes on the stars.